everyone to Icon. My name's Dan, and I am so glad to be with you today. Also glad to be back. I actually was recently just with a team of people from Icon, and we took Icon Church's very first missions trip this past week. So why don't you give it up for the team? We had an incredible time. I got just a few pictures that we're going to be putting up here. We had an awesome time partnering with Oasis Church in Monclova. We worked with them. They did a baptism service with 13 people getting baptized. It was awesome. We went to an orphanage and worked a little bit with them and partnered up with another organization in Monclova, Mexico, a woman that goes to families who have children that are struggling with cancer and cares for them and tries to give them some opportunities that they wouldn't have otherwise. We did some things in a local plaza there and invited some kids to come and sing some songs together. It was just an incredible time. It was awesome. We will have more trips like this. We are creating a partnership with the church in Monclova and the organizations there in Monclova. We will be going back again and again. And I want to encourage you, man, if there's any way on a future trip that you can go, you will absolutely want to jump on this. We had a great time. So one last time, give it up for the team that went. They did awesome. It was, it was a lot of fun. Well, hey, we are jumping into our final week of our series, Runaway Prophet. And what we've been doing with this series is we've been looking at the story of Jonah. And I was talking to someone, and they asked kind of what we were talking about this week. And I told them, I said, Jonah. And they're like, you've talked about Jonah for 2 weeks now. Like, how many times can you just kind of keep talking through the same story? It's not a very long story, but that's kind of the idea. That's kind of part of it. And Kelly referenced this last week. If you missed last week, I'd highly encourage you to go back and check it out. But she talked about this idea that the ancient rabbis would look at the Hebrew scriptures, would look at stories like the story of Jonah, almost like a kaleidoscope or a gem that as you turned it, these new images would appear, or light would refract off of the gem in a different way. And it encouraged the people of God to continue to look at a story, but to rotate it and turn it and see the light that shines through as you look at it from a different angle. And in week one, we did that. We looked at kind of this big picture idea, and we looked at this idea of what is God like? And really, the story of Jonah is a story describing the nature and the character of God to the Hebrew people of that day. And it asks us a question about what do we think God is like? And then last week, Kelly kind of turned the kaleidoscope a little bit and looked at this story from a different angle. Talking about the story of Jonah is asking us a question, what are we like? Do we find ourselves maybe a little bit like Jonah? Or are we more like the God that this author, this prophet describes, always having mercy for the least of these, for kind of the other in our world, that Jonah is begging this question of us of what are we like? And today we're going to look at this story one last time, and we're going to just hyper focus on one detail of the story. We're going to really dial in at the very end of the story. And maybe just the last few verses of this one story can speak to us today and can challenge us to possibly go into our world and live a little bit differently. You see, the story of Jonah is a story of an ancient prophet, and God told him to go to the city of Nineveh. It was the capital of the nation of Assyria, which was basically like the enemies of Israel. They were like the bad guys. They were the worst of the worst. And Jonah, being a Hebrew person, being an Israelite, didn't like the Assyrians. And God said, I want you to go so that they can, and tell them about me, so that they can repent, so that they can change their ways, and they can be spared. The problem was, Jonah didn't want to. And in the end of Jonah, you have this clear depiction where the author is just kind of going above and beyond to declare what God is like. It's like the author, as they're writing, is like, I don't want anyone to miss this because I'm going to tell you what God is like. So he puts these words into Jonah's mouth, and here's what Jonah says. I knew that you are gracious and a compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. They're saying, like, this is what God is like, right? And Jonah's kind of saying, this is why I don't want to go. Because these Ninevites, I know what you're going to do. I'm sure you're going to show them mercy. I'm sure you're going to forgive them. And I don't want that. And ultimately, that's exactly what God does. Jonah goes begrudgingly, and he kind of preaches this really bad message. And the people turn from their ways. And the story ends with like Jonah walking outside of town and he's ticked. He's like, see, God, I knew that you'd spare them. I wanted to have a good day and see them wiped out, right? Like, all I want to do is watch the world burn, God. And God has mercy. So Jonah like goes outside of town. He sets up a little shelter and he's like, you know what? I know that sometimes I can like make a mistake, right after I decide I'm going to do right. Maybe if the Ninevites screw up just a little bit, maybe God will smite them. Like maybe I can have some hope and God's just going to burn the city, right? So Jonah sets up side of town and he wants to kind of watch what happens. And here's what we read. Jonah had gone out and sat down at a place east of the city. There he made himself a shelter, sat in its shade, and waited to see what would happen to the city. Jonah was just hoping that maybe it would be destroyed. Maybe God would send down fire and burn up the city. But here's the deal. In this area in Nineveh at this time is like Texas in July, right? Like it is hot, like hot. When we were in Mexico, that we went into this little building and it was like 111. And we went in and they had fans on, which basically served as heaters, right? It just like felt like you were like, someone opened the oven and was like, here, let me put a fan in there. And you're like, oh, that's better, I'm roasting with a breeze, And it was like that for Jonah. And Jonah's like, oh man, he's burning. Like we all want to watch the world burn sometimes. We just want to do it in the shade, right? Jonah was like, I want to watch the world burn. I'd just rather be in the shade sipping a Mai Tai. So God, if you could just hook me up a little bit, that'd be nice. And God was like, I'm not going to be the bartender. Jesus will take care of that later. Water, wine. Anyway, but here's what I will do. I will give you a little shade. So here's what happens. I said, the Lord God provided a leafy plant and made it grow up over Jonah to give him shade for his head to ease his discomfort. And Jonah was very happy about the plant. And I think this is unique that the author puts this in here, that Jonah was very happy about what? The plant. Now, mind you, God just spared an entire city. And what's Jonah most happy about? A plant. I got some shade. I feel nice. Like I am living my best life, right? But then to kind of prove a point, God sends something else. He sent a plant and then he sends something else. But at dawn the next day, God provided a worm, which chewed the plant so that it withered. When the sun rose, God provided, another thing he provided, a scorching east wind. And the sun blazed on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. He wanted to die and said, it would be better for me to die than to live. Jonah's a bit of a drama queen, right? Like he is just like, my life is awful. You had mercy on these horrible people. I had a plant for a day and you're the stupid worm chewed that up, right? Like Jonah is ticked off. And then the story of Jonah ends with these three final sentences. As Jonah is just ticked off, he's wishing he was dead, God kind of like speaks to the truth of the situation at hand. And let's look at how it finishes. But the Lord said, you have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals? God is sitting there, like I only translate this to modern day. God says to Jonah, really? Like, really, Jonah? There's 120,000 people that were just spared, and you care more about a stupid plant. See, the story of Jonah, especially this ending passage, is really asking all of us a question. I mean, this is how it ends. So it kind of like hangs with this tension in the air. We don't know if Jonah goes, you know what, God, you're right. I'm a dummy. I'm sorry. We don't know if Jonah says, forget it, and walks away. We don't know what happens, because it's meant to leave us hanging with some tension in the air. And the question being asked of Jonah and the question being asked of every one of us is this: what's more important to you, your personal comfort or a world out there that's hurting? See, this is what we're talking about today. And can I be honest? This is a challenging question for me. Because a lot of times, can I just be honest? lot of times for me, I care more about my personal comfort. If I'm just to get real honest, I know like I'm a pastor, right? I know I'm supposed to stand up here and like talk to you guys and stuff. And I'd love it if I could say, guys, I nail this 10 out of 10 times, but I don't. If you're looking for me to be a perfect pastor, listen, let's save us all some trouble and you should leave now because I will fall really short. You can ask my wife and kids. They might lie on Father's Day. Ask them tomorrow, right? Then they'll be honest. And this is hard for me. I remember a specific moment that I really wrestled with this idea of comfort or helping people. There was this moment that it was leading up to Easter of 2017. And I got this idea in my head because I'd gone through a really, really difficult season. For a couple years, I was struggling with questions and doubt, questions about the character and the nature of God as a pastor, right? Like I was standing up here on stage talking to all you, but wrestling deep down within about what I believe about God. I was wrestling with doubt. Does God exist? And what is God like? And I had all these questions and all this doubt and all this shame because I'm the pastor and I'm not supposed to have these kinds of questions. And then I was meeting so many other people that were wrestling with questions like this. And I realized, man, how helpful could it be if other people knew they weren't alone with those doubts? And this idea popped into my head. And it was, on Easter, you should talk about your doubt. And I said, that's a really dumb idea. You know, it's one of those pesky ideas that I really felt like it was God and I really felt like I was supposed to. And I was doing my best Jonah saying, God, that's a stupid idea. Let's try plan B. And it just kind of kept coming back. You see, I'd kind of come back to a good place. But I still had these things and some things had shifted for me and I was really wrestling and I felt like, God, listen, I don't want to talk to people about that because that's going to be uncomfortable. Because there are some people that won't want to hear that from a pastor. Like, and not to mention the fact that we had 5 Sunday services planned. I didn't want to have that conversation 5 times. I didn't want to have that conversation 1 time. And then I found out that my parents from Illinois would be in town for that Sunday. And I said, God, that's just it. We're just not doing this, right? Like that's just super stupid, right? And then I happened to be reading this book, this really stupid book by Brené Brown. And if you know Brené Brown, like one of her big things is like shame and vulnerability, which is not something you want to read when you feel like you should be vulnerable because it was just dumb. And I kept thinking like all these people are going to say things. And all these people are going to have their problems. There's going to be people that say things about me. And I don't want that. And then I came across in this book, Daring Greatly, this quote that she got the title from, and it's a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. And I want to read for you this quote because I knew I was supposed to be vulnerable. I knew I was supposed to step into that arena because I knew it would help people. I was talking with people and I saw the same questions that they had and I thought, man, this would be so helpful. One of the most powerful things that you can say to someone when they're struggling is, me too. Like I've been there. I'm with you. You're not alone. And I knew that's what God wanted me to do. And then I read this quote. It says, it is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again. Because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. I read that book, and so many times I want to throw it out the window. So I didn't want to hear this, but I knew that I was supposed to step into this moment and be honest. So Easter 2017 and the Sunday afterwards, I did just that. And I talked about those questions and those doubts and the challenges that came alongside those. And you know what? Afterwards, it was awesome. I talked to so many people that were helped by that said, I feel normal. I feel like I can actually go to church now. I feel like I can kind of pray again. I'm given kind of a way back. And at the same time, it was amazing and the conversations were awesome. But you know what else? It also sucked. Because there were people that were upset. There were people that said things. There were other pastors that called me and talked to other people. There were people that called me a heretic because I had doubts. There were all these things. It was painful. It was uncomfortable, but it was also worth it. So listen, I don't always make the right decision. I think that one, because God knew, like he was really abundantly clear with me. He's like, this guy's a little thick. He's kind of like Jonah. I need to speak real clearly. And it doesn't always pan out that way. And I don't always get it right. But this question of Jonah, the story of Jonah rather, begs this question. That what's more important, a world that's hurting and getting involved in that, or your own comfort? You see, I'm not the only one that's gonna have to face this question. You are too. I didn't have to face this question because I'm a pastor. I had to face this question because I'm a follower of Jesus. And if you're a follower of Jesus, this is your question too. You don't get to sit in the sidelines. You don't get to sit in the chair and go, man, I'm glad I didn't have to do that. Because there'll be other things that you have to do. There'll be other ways that you have to step outside of your comfort. And the story of Jonah is asking you, what do you care more about? That plant, your own personal comfort, or people? And choosing people means that you have to get out from under the plant. But here's the deal. Here's kind of the problem with like a talk like this, is because it's easy to go like, oh, that's good. Amen, brother. You know, and then walk out and do nothing, right? Because it's so like not specific, right? And we like vague, right? Because we don't have to do anything with vague. Because we can go, I'm going to wrestle with that. Like, I'm just going to marinate on that, right? And it's so like out there and ethereal that you can walk out and you don't have to do anything. So I'm kind of a jerk like that. If I have to go through uncomfortable things, I'm going to make you do it too. So I'm going to get abundantly clear with you, right? Like if I have to do this, so do you, right? Like you don't get a pass, Jonah. So we're all going to get uncomfortable together. So let me get kind of abundantly clear about the implications of an idea like this. So what does it mean to kind of get uncomfortable for people? To sacrifice personal comfort for the care of people who are hurting? What does that mean and what does that look like? I'm gonna give us 3 ways that we can do this. Really practical ways. Because what this looks like is it looks like help. It looks like support. It looks like coming alongside people and doing the work with them. So 3 things you can support. Number 1, support the least of these. Jesus is super clear about this. He actually has this account, he has this story, and he's talking through about basically at the end of our lives, what are the things that really matter, right? Like church attendance? No, that's not it. Like, reading the Bible? Like, no, that's actually not what Jesus brings up. When like all these things that Jesus could bring up of what really is gonna matter at the end of our lives, here's what he says. Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. So first, this whole like whatever you did idea, I'm gonna leave that up to you. That's gonna be between you and Jesus to figure out like whatever that is that you are to do. But I'll give you some ideas. And I'll draw on these ideas because they're the very ones that Jesus said. How about feeding the hungry? Giving water to the thirsty? Clothing the naked, those with not enough clothes for themselves, caring for the widows and the orphans, visiting those in prison. Those are the practical things that Jesus talked about. How are we doing at those things? And then we can get to this question of like the least of these. What are the least of these? For you, what are the least of these? Maybe it's the homeless person. If you're in school still, if you're a student, maybe it's the kid sitting by themselves that gets picked on. Maybe it's the kid that doesn't have any friends. Maybe for the rest of us, maybe it's the immigrants. Maybe it's the single mom. Maybe it's the pregnant teenager. And we could go through all these things and you say, well, Dan, if I care for them, if I show up in their lives, what if people think I'm like condoning those things? What if people talk about me and say like all of a sudden like they think I must not have a problem with X, Y, or Z? And to that question, I'd say, you know what, then you get to be like Jesus. Because they said those very same things about him too. So I've got a question. If people aren't judging you in those ways, if people aren't asking those questions about you, maybe you're not in those things. Maybe you need to be accused of those things. And it will cost you. It will cost you maybe reputation. What other people think about you, what people say. It'll definitely cost you your time. It'll definitely cost you some energy. It might cost you financially to support some of these things. And that might not be comfortable. Which matters more to you? Does your comfort matter more? Or do the least of these matter more? How about this? Who are those? Like Kelly said, who's your Nineveh? Who's the people that least deserve grace? Who's the people that least deserve mercy? How about you start with those people? What would that look like? To get in those people's lives. I can tell you, it'd be uncomfortable. So since one thing's not enough, I want you to be more uncomfortable. The second thing is I want you to support one another. I want you to support one another. This is what the Bible really challenged us to do. This is what the early church did. This is what we're commanded to do. An early church planter was writing a letter to a church and he challenged them in this. And he said this, he said, carry each other's burdens and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. How do we fulfill the law of Christ? By carrying one another's burdens. And he was talking to a church. He was talking to a group of people like this. So you're supposed to carry that person's burdens. And you're supposed to carry their burdens. And you're supposed to carry his burdens. That's how this works. Well, guess what? It's hard to carry a burden you don't know about. I think oftentimes our biggest problem isn't an unwillingness to carry burdens. It's an unwillingness to find out what those burdens are. So if you don't know the burdens of the people in this room, what do you need to do to find out? Maybe, I'll say a few things and hopefully step on a few toes on the way. Maybe you show up early and you talk to people. Maybe you don't dip out as soon as it's done and you talk to people. Maybe you join a small group and you get to know each other. Maybe you join a serve team here. And you serve alongside people and find out what those burdens are. Or if you've ever come to Icon, you're like, man, Icon should do this. I've had people come up to me and say, Dan, you should do this. You know, Icon should do this. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Go for it. You're Icon? Like, I'm doing my thing. Like, this is what I got to do. Like, I got to speak. Are you speaking next Sunday? You're not? I mean, yeah, you're not on the calendar. So why don't you do it? Like, because you're Icon. So if you have some idea of Icon should, do it. We'd love to come alongside you if we can help you in that. So yeah, come talk to us, but do that. If you feel like you don't know enough people, get to know each other, then plan something, then do something. And it will cost you. That's the point. The point is recognizing that other people need something, that they need you, and then you showing up in their lives. And finally, as if it's not uncomfortable enough, support the church. I'm taking this a little bit of a different angle because you could say that these past two things are the same things, and in a sense, they absolutely are. But here's what I mean by this. The church is both an organizing, like it's a gathering. It's all of you, but it's also a means to gather, right? And the early church understood this distinction, right? They kind of got this. And they early on, they nailed it, or at least they wrote about nailing it. I'm sure they missed it a lot too, but they also wanted to know here's the ideal. At our best, here's what we do. And they were honest about other times that they missed it, but early on, they're like, hey, this is us doing well, and I want you to see what this looks like. And here's the way they wrote about it. They, the church, the people, you, devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to everyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. This is the ideal. And I know we don't live in agrarian society anymore, right? So this, I'm not saying every day you better be here, right? I come into work and you're well, I'm here, that's not the point. But it's what does this look like for us today? I was talking to someone recently, and we were kind of talking about Icon and what we're able to do in the community and ways that we can do more. A couple of weeks ago, we started this Dollar Club thing, this initiative that, once a month, everybody gives $1 and we find a way that we can give it away in our community. And we were talking about these different things, and we were just kind of dreaming together, just kind of spitballing. You know when you do that? When the lottery gets super high and you're maybe just one ticket, that kind of dreaming, right? And we were thinking what could we do as a means of gathering as a church? If everyone, if 100% of the people, if everyone just gave a little bit, or just said, I'll volunteer X number of hours, literally every single person. Because national statistics, we're not far off what the nation is. It's a very small percentage of people really engage, both with their time and their resources. What if 100% of the people, 450, 500 people, all did something? I'm telling you, it's like dreaming about winning the lottery. It's that scale. It's crazy the things we could do for our community. How amazing would that be? To show up to our school district and to say, hey, is there any project you've been wanting to do? Is there any schools kind of maybe that aren't as well funded, that are a little worse off? How about 10 grand? Would that do anything? Man, the things that we could do. But here's the problem with that. It costs you. It costs you. Because it costs me. We'd have to show up in our time and our energy. It would take our finances. It would take all of us leaning in. And that's uncomfortable by nature. But the thing is, Icon is here today because there are people that have done that. There are people in this church that decided to wait a little bit to build their home so that Icon could do more. There are people that sacrificed greatly so we could be here today, so we could meet these needs, so we could do these things. What if we all did that? I'm telling you, it'd change everything. It'd be horribly uncomfortable, but it'd be amazing. So I want to challenge you. The story of Jonah is challenging every one of us. It's asking us what we care more about, people or plants. I can't answer that question for you. Only you can answer that. But I want to ask you, will you risk your own comfort for the sake of the least of these, for one another, and for the church? Would you do that? Because if we did this, man, especially if all of us did this, if a lot of us did this, it would change our community like that. So may we listen to what Jonah is saying to us today. May we be different than Jonah. May we care more about people than plants. May we choose to dare greatly. May we choose in moments to err. But may we choose to get into the arena and do something. May we be like Jesus and have people talk behind our backs. May we have people question our motives. May we have people think that we're way out there because we're out there in the margins where Jesus is. And may we be a church, a gathering of people that will sacrifice our own comfort for the least of these, for one another, and for the church. Amen? Amen. Let me pray for you, and then we'll dismiss.